the Duke's great hall, a single song silenced every noble. Anthony's voice thundered, "She is his weakness, his ruin." Yet the cruel Duke rose, his fury like fire. "No," he declared, "she is my salvation." And with that kiss, the court gasped, their world forever changed. But how did a trembling merchant's daughter tame the cruelest man alive? Let me tell you from the very beginning.
The chandeliers glared down like merciless suns, their brilliance reflecting off gold leaf cornices and mirrored walls, until Rowena thought she might dissolve in their fire. The grand ballroom pulsed with silk and satin, glittering jewels and jewelled words, every smile sharper than a knife. She stood at the threshold, her gown betraying seams that bespoke a tailor's frantic mending rather than a couturier's hand. Her grip on the fabric trembled, as though by clinging to it she might hold herself together. A ripple passed through the crowd as her presence was marked. A merchant's daughter, allowed within these walls only because her father's daring trade routes had momentarily enriched the crown's coffers. She had no lineage, no title, only the faint gloss of her father's fortune to excuse her intrusion. The whispers rose, some hidden behind fans, others murmured without care. Doesn't she look pale? Did she truly think she belonged? How amusing. She shakes like a leaf before autumn's wind. Her throat burned, shame pressing in, hot and suffocating. She prayed for invisibility, but invisibility never came. Each step across marble felt like walking into judgment itself, the room's cruel gaze her gauntlet. Yet beneath the humiliation, pride stirred. She could not, would not, give them the pleasure of watching her crumble. Her father's name, fragile as spun glass, rested on her shoulders. The violins sang, spinning a waltz bright enough to mock her silence. Couples twirled, gowns blooming like painted flowers, men's boots striking in measured time. Rowena kept to the edge, determined to pass unnoticed, determined to survive the night with dignity intact. But fortune, always a faithless friend, abandoned her. He saw her, the cruelest man in the kingdom, Gideon Albrecht, Duke of Weimar. His shadow fell long even in a hall ablaze with light. Men spoke his name in tones meant for war councils. Women whispered of his ruthlessness, half in fear, half in desire. Rivals called him a wolf cloaked in velvet, whose smile was merely the first flash of teeth. His cruelty was not a rumour. It was a shield sharpened from necessity, a habit worn so deep that no one could remember if gentleness had ever lived within him. And now that gaze, iron grey, unflinching, fastened upon her. Rowena's stomach dropped. Her first thought, why me? Her second, because I look weak. The crowd parted for him without command. Gideon's presence was enough to bend nobles aside, as though the air itself bowed before him. He crossed the distance, bootsteps deliberate, expression unreadable. The room held its breath, the anticipation of spectacle electrifying the silence. He halted before her, offering a bow so smooth it felt like mockery. "You," he said, voice a low ripple across the marble hush, "dance with me." It was no request, it was decree. To refuse would mean ruin. Rowena's face burned. For a heartbeat she considered begging off, claiming dizziness or some trivial injury. But the ring of eyes around her demanded compliance. With stiff fingers, she placed her hand in his. His grip tightened, firm as shackles. They walked to the centre of the floor, space unfolding before them like prey fleeing a predator. The musicians swelled, eager to match the drama. Gideon's arm encircled her waist, the other guiding her hand upward, commanding every movement. The dance began. Rowena stumbled once, then steadied. He led with lethal grace, each step crisp, each turn an unspoken dare. "Falter, and I will expose you." She followed, but the humiliation pressed in harder with every pivot. Whispers licked at her ears. "You shake," Gideon murmured, a smirk tugging his mouth. "Do you fear me so much, or is this merely the first time silk has touched your skin?" The words sliced deeper than he knew, She flushed scarlet, fury colliding with shame. "Perhaps, my lord," Rowena said, her voice sharp enough to still a violin's bow mid-stroke. "It is not I who should tremble, for it takes little courage to mock those beneath you. Does true strength not lie in sparing them?" The music faltered. A stunned hush crashed through the ballroom. Rowena felt the air shift, the scandal she had birthed spreading like wildfire. Fools did not address the Duke this way, and yet she had, boldly, recklessly. Gideon's eyes narrowed, the faintest crack in his impenetrable armour. For the first time, it was not her trembling but his composure that wavered. And so the scandal began. What would you do if the most feared man in the room singled you out, mock you or defy him? Rowena's breath caught as the violins swelled once more, the silence of her bold words echoing across the grand ballroom like a challenge that could not be undone. Whispers spread like wildfire, quick and merciless, curling around her name, attaching scandal to it before she had even drawn her next breath. She had spoken foolishly, recklessly, and though it burned her pride to think it, perhaps gloriously too. For she would not be remembered as the trembling merchant's daughter cowering before the Duke. She would be remembered as the girl who dared. And yet, the weight of his gaze pressed into her like the cold edge of a blade. Gideon's eyes, grey as tempered steel, did not soften at her defiance. They sharpened. He pulled her closer into the next turn of the dance, his grip firm at her waist, his movements precise, calculated, as if the entire ballroom were an audience to his performance of control. "You mistake your place," he said low, his lips near her ear, a voice meant only for her but carried with the weight of judgment. "Restraint, you call it? No, little sparrow. Restraint is sparing a creature when it does not deserve the chance to fly." Heat rushed to her cheeks. She bit back the quiver of her lip, forcing her spine straight. If he wished to humiliate her, she would not grant him the satisfaction of her silence. "And yet," she replied, voice steady though her heart raced, "you hold me so tightly, my lord, one might think you fear what would happen if I were free." A murmur rose from the crowd, too far to hear her words, but close enough to feel the tension coil between them. Gideon's jaw tightened. His smirk curved back, but it was sharper now, less amusement, more warning. The violins quickened, the dancers around them blurred into a haze of colour. Rowena felt her pulse match the rhythm of the music, her courage burning against her reason. Foolish courage, yes, but hers all the same. She could not bear to be seen as meek, not here, not tonight. At the edge of the ballroom, Marjorie watched, her fan snapping shut with a sharp crack that betrayed her agitation. "By the stars," she muttered to the noblewoman beside her, though her eyes never left Rowena. "She is daring him." Oh, Rowena. The friend she had known since girlhood, always too bold for her own good, was now dancing with fire, and the cruelest fire of all. Nearby, another pair of eyes narrowed with interest. Lord Anthony, lean and sharp-featured, leaned lazily against a column, his goblet tilting idly in his hand. The rival of Gideon's political seat, Anthony had spent years waiting for a fracture in the Duke's armour. And here it was, clear as crystal. A slip of a girl from a merchant's house, bold enough to rattle the man feared by all. Anthony's smile curved slow, like a fox scenting blood on the wind. He said nothing, only watched. Back at the centre of the floor, Gideon bent Rowena into a turn so swift it left her breathless. His voice cut the air like steel. "Do you imagine your sharp tongue protects you? Do you think these nobles laugh with you, child?" His eyes gleamed with cruel certainty. "They laugh because you are nothing more than the entertainment I provide." Rowena's throat constricted, humiliation flooding hot to her ears. Every whisper in the hall seemed to turn into mocking laughter, every face a mirror of her shame. For a moment the flame inside her flickered, nearly extinguished. But then she thought of her father, the weary lines on his brow, The way he had pressed the invitation into her hand as though it were a key to a door he had never been allowed to open. She thought of his pride, fragile as glass resting in her keeping. She could not falter, not here, not before them all. Her eyes lifted, meeting Gideon's once more. "Then I am a poor choice for a jest, Your Grace," she said, a trembling defiance threading her tone. "For I do not break easily." The crowd shifted, a restless stir at her daring. Marjorie pressed her fan against her lips to hide her gasp. Anthony's smile deepened into something darker, dangerous. And Gideon's grip did not loosen, though his expression sharpened into something unreadable. The music neared its crescendo. Gideon spun her one final time, the movement abrupt, meant to disorient. Rowena's skirts flared, her balance wavered, but she righted herself, jaw clenched against the tide of humiliation. The Duke's lips curved in victory, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. Curiosity, unwilling fascination. As the last note rang out, he released her, bowing with perfect grace. But his words cut sharper than any blade. "Enjoy your moment, little sparrow," Gideon said, his voice pitched to carry to those nearest, who leaned in with greedy ears. "But remember, a sparrow that dares to sing too loudly in the company of hawks will not sing for long." The ballroom stilled, a hush falling like frost. Rowena's breath caught, her boldness suddenly a noose around her throat. She curtsied stiffly, her cheeks aflame, and when she rose the Duke had already turned his back, leaving her alone at the centre of the floor, exposed, humiliated, marked. The scandal was sealed. The cruel Duke had chosen her for his jest, and she had been bold enough to answer. But at what cost? At the edge of the room, Marjorie's heart ached for her friend. Anthony's eyes gleamed with calculation. And Gideon, though his back was to them all, felt the echo of her words linger. An irritation he could not shake, a defiance that had stirred something he did not yet name. Rowena stood trembling yet unbroken, the whispers swelling around her like smoke. Foolish she might have been, reckless certainly, but she would not bow. Not tonight, not ever. The ballroom still hummed with whispers long after the final notes of the waltz had faded. Rowena's defiance hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to erase. Gideon stood rigid, his chest tight with an unfamiliar weight pressing against his pride. He had expected her to break, to tremble, to bow her head, to confirm what the nobles already believed, that she was beneath them. Instead, she had sharpened her tongue against him and bled her boldness across the polished marble floor for all to see. He should have dismissed her. That was the wiser path. A merchant's daughter, foolish and reckless, was beneath his notice. He could have walked away and let the scandal fade into the night. But when he caught the flicker of smug amusement in Lord Anthony's eyes at the edge of the hall, Gideon felt his resolve harden. To ignore her defiance now would be to admit weakness, and weakness was something he could not afford. Not here. Not ever. He turned sharply, his voice cutting across the crowd like a blade. "Seize her!" Gasps erupted as guards moved forward. Rowena stiffened, her heart leaping into her throat. For a fleeting instant, she thought he must be jesting, but the steel in his gaze told her otherwise. "Your Grace!" Marjorie's cry broke from the crowd, but one warning glance from Gideon silenced her. Rowena's spine stiffened as two guards took her by the arms. She wanted to fight, to claw free, but pride forbade her from showing fear. Instead, she lifted her chin high, though her heart thundered wildly. "Do not mistake me for your plaything, my lord," she hissed, her voice low enough that only Gideon caught it. His lips curved into a cold smile. "On the contrary," he said, "you have chosen to play with me." And with that, he turned his back to her, signalling the end of her place in the ballroom. The crowd parted, their silence louder than any outcry. Anthony's smirk widened at the spectacle, his satisfaction clear as Rowena was dragged from the glittering chandeliers into the shadowed halls of the palace. The cell door clanged shut with finality, iron echoing against stone. The chill of the dungeon seeped into Rowena's bones, the torchlight casting cruel shadows across damp walls. She sat on the narrow bench, her head bowed, her fists clenched in her lap. Humiliation seared her skin. This was what came of her foolish boldness, mockery, whispers, and now chains. But as silence settled thick and heavy, another sensation rose inside her. Defiance. She would not let him win. She would not let this place swallow her spirit whole. She closed her eyes, the memory of her father's voice urging her courage echoing faintly. And then, almost without thought, she sang. It began as a whisper, soft and trembling, a melody carried on the fragile thread of her breath. But soon her voice grew steadier, filling the dark corridor with sound. The notes wound through stone like silk, pure and unyielding, carrying not sorrow but strength. This was who she was, Rowena, daughter of a merchant, girl of no title, but a voice that belonged to her and her alone. Her song lifted higher, resonant and haunting, spilling into the silence where despair had lived. She sang not for them, but for herself, for the fire that pride demanded she keep alive. Above, Gideon paced the length of his study, the echo of her words still cutting at his pride. True power lies in restraint. Foolish girl, reckless child, he should not have cared. And yet... The sound reached him faintly, carried on the draught of the old stones. He froze, a voice, pure and unbroken, drifting upward from the dungeons. He stepped closer to the open archway of the hall, straining to hear. The cruel mask he wore, the shield he carried, all seemed to falter beneath the gentle persistence of her song. He closed his eyes, unbidden, and for the first time in years, the relentless storm inside him quieted. Peace. It was fleeting, delicate as glass, but it was there, and it enraged him. He should have silenced her, should have ordered her voice stilled at once. But he did not. He stood in the dark, listening, teeth clenched, and did nothing. At first, the guards barked at her to stop. Their voices were rough, impatient. "Enough," one snapped. "You'll disturb his grace." Another threatened punishment if she continued. Hours later, when her voice finally fell silent, Gideon noticed. The quiet pressed against him like a void. He paced his chambers, unsettled. For the first time since she had been taken below, the air seemed heavier, emptier without her voice. "Why is she silent?" he demanded of the guard at his door. The man stammered, bowing low. "Your Grace, we told her to stop." A sharp crack rang out as Gideon's fist struck the desk. "Fools! Do you silence what I have not ordered silenced?" His voice thundered through the chamber. "Go to her. Tell her she is free to sing, always." The guard fled at once, scrambling down the stone stairway. When he reached the dungeon, Rowena looked up with narrowed eyes as he relayed the command. Her lips twitched with a smile she barely bothered to hide. Free to sing? Even in chains, her defiance had forced the mighty Duke to bend. For 3 nights Gideon listened. He told himself he would not go below, because he would not grant her the dignity of his presence, but he stayed near, close enough to hear the rise and fall of her voice. Her song slipped into his mind like water into cracks, softening edges long turned to stone. Finally, he broke. "Bring her to me," he ordered on the 4th evening. The guards obeyed. Shackles clinked as Rowena was led up the winding staircase, torchlight dancing across her defiant face. She did not bow when she entered his study, though her gown was rumpled and her hair tangled from days in the cell. She lifted her chin, her eyes alight with the same reckless spark that had burned in the ballroom. Gideon leaned back in his chair, studying her. His heart betrayed him with a faint, unwelcome quickening. "Sing," he commanded. Her brow arched, foolish boldness rising instantly. "For you? Never." The words struck him harder than he expected. No one denied him. Not the council, not the crown, not the nobles who bent under his cruelty. And yet here she was, a merchant's daughter in chains, daring to refuse. His jaw tightened. "You sing freely to stones and shadows," he said. "Sing now, or you will learn the price of disobedience." Her lips curved into something dangerously close to a smile. "Then perhaps the stones deserve me more than you do." The audacity of her words lit his blood with fury, and something else he dared not name. He rose to his feet, towering over her, his command crisp and final. "Return her to the cell." The guards moved at once, dragging her away. Her laughter, soft, foolish, defiant, lingered behind her, echoing through his chamber long after she had gone. And for the first time in years, the Duke of Weimar felt the sting of defeat. The nights in the palace grew restless, as though the stones themselves had learned to listen. Rowena's voice threaded through the dungeon air like moonlight woven into sound, soft, defiant, unbroken. She did not sing to please him, nor to ease her own suffering. She sang because silence would have meant surrender, and Rowena Vale did not surrender. And Gideon, Duke of Weimar, did not stop her. He told himself it was strategy, that silencing her would feed the gossip already blooming after the ballroom scandal. That letting her voice roam the halls was harmless compared to the rumours Anthony and the other jackals would spin if they sensed hesitation. But in truth, the sound had worked its way beneath his armour. Each note she lifted loosened something in him he had thought sealed forever. He went to her. On the 5th night, Gideon descended into the bowels of his own palace, his steps echoing against stone. The guards straightened at his approach, their gazes wary as though the walls themselves might accuse them if they dared breathe too loudly. Rowena rose from the bench as he came into view, her chain clinking softly against the floor. Her eyes blazed with that same reckless defiance he remembered from the ballroom. She should have looked broken by now. Instead, she looked carved from steel. "You came yourself," she said, her tone light, mocking. "Have the shadows grown jealous of my song?" His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "The shadows do not sing to provoke me." "Nor do I sing for you," she retorted. He stepped closer, the torchlight sharpening the lines of his face, his gaze cutting into her. "Then why do you sing at all?" Rowena tilted her chin, foolish and bold. "Because it is mine, my voice, my will. You can chain my body, but you will not chain that." Her words struck deeper than she knew. Gideon leaned against the bars, studying her like one might study a blade, testing for weakness, for temper, for the place it might break. "And if your song cost your family their place in this city?" he asked softly. For the first time, her lips pressed into silence. Her father, her younger siblings. Their livelihoods had risen with her father's trade, and already the nobles sneered at his success. One word from the Duke could ruin them. Her fists clenched, her pride and fear warring inside her chest. At last she whispered, "You wouldn't." He arched a brow. "Wouldn't I?" The tremor of doubt shook her, but only for a breath. Then she straightened, fire returning to her eyes. "Then I will bargain. Release me to my father. Let him see that I am alive. He waits in worry, and he cannot come near your gates. If you promise me that, I will give you my song when you command it." The audacity of her, still negotiating in chains, made him laugh. A low, sharp sound that startled even him. "You would make terms with me? You, a merchant's daughter, speaking to a duke as though we sit at the same table?" "Better than kneeling," she shot back. Their eyes locked, heat and fire clashing across the iron bars. For the briefest moment, Gideon saw not a prisoner but a woman who refused to bow even when the world pressed her down. And damn him! But the sight unsettled him. Outside the cell, the palace was restless. Lord Anthony had wasted no time sowing whispers in the ballroom after her arrest. Now, other nobles carried the stories like embers fanned into flame. The Duke humiliated the merchant's daughter. The Duke showed his cruelty before all. They speculated, but they knew nothing of what passed in his dungeons. Only silence and rumour reached their ears. Weakness, that was the word murmured behind raised goblets, passed between smirks. Gideon knew it. He heard it in council meetings when rivals looked at him too long, when courtiers bowed with too much courtesy. They thought him distracted, ensnared, and perhaps he was. He should have silenced the girl, should have ended the spectacle. But when he returned to his study and the silence stretched like a blade against his throat, he realized he would rather hear her voice than endure the emptiness. The 6th night came. Rowena was humming when he entered, her lips curved in faint amusement as though she had been expecting him. "Back again?" she asked, her tone teasing. "Tell me, do your lords and ladies know their mighty duke comes creeping down to listen to a caged bird?" His jaw tightened, but he refused to rise to her bait. Instead, he unlocked the cell with his own hand, stepping inside. The air between them snapped with tension, her defiance meeting his command. "Sing," he said. Rowena folded her arms. "We had an agreement. My father first." His eyes narrowed. "Do not test me." "Then do not test me," she returned, her voice steady, bold, foolish. Something cracked then, whether in him or in the walls between them he did not know. He caught her wrist, pulling her closer until the torchlight spilled over her face, her defiance burning bright enough to blind. "You think yourself brave, but courage is cheap when chained. Sing, and I will see to your father." She searched his eyes, seeking truth in the shadows, and for the first time she found no cruelty there, only something raw, something unguarded. Slowly she drew in a breath, and she sang. The song was not long, not elaborate. A simple folk melody, one her mother had taught her before sickness carried her away. The notes trembled at first, then steadied, filling the cell with warmth no torch could cast. Her voice poured over Gideon like water over stone, seeping into places he had thought barren. He stood unmoving, every muscle locked, as though any shift might shatter the fragile moment. The storm inside him quieted again, but this time he did not rage against it. He let it be. He let her voice pierce him. When the last note faded, silence crashed, heavy and profound. Gideon released her wrist slowly, his hand lingering a fraction too long before he stepped back. "You bargain well," he said at last, his voice rougher than he intended. "Your father will know you live." Rowena's shoulders sagged, relief flickering across her face, but pride kept her chin high, her eyes locked on his. "Then you have your song, my lord." And though she said it with scorn, Gideon felt the truth echo deeper than he wished. He had far more than that. He had tasted the fire of a woman who dared defy him, and now he could not forget it. "Would you call Rowena reckless and foolish, or wise beyond fear?" The bargain had been struck. 2 days after the Duke first demanded her song, Rowena stood once more in her father's modest home. The meeting was brief, heavily watched, her wrists still marked by iron. But it was enough. Her father clutched her hands as though he might never let go, his weathered face wet with tears he tried to hide. He asked nothing, demanded nothing, only searched her eyes for signs she was whole. And when she whispered that she was alive, he pressed his forehead to hers in trembling gratitude. The guards pulled her back quickly, but Rowena did not resist. She had kept her promise. She had given the Duke his song, and in return, she had given her father peace. That was all that mattered. But as she was escorted back through the palace gates, the strange truth gnawed at her. She had not only fulfilled her bargain, she had also felt Gideon's eyes on her, sharper than chains, whenever she sang. And for reasons she dared not name, she sang not just for her father anymore. Her voice became part of the palace itself. Every evening she was brought to him, her song filling the shadows of his study while firelight played over stone walls. The guards lingered at the door, never inside. Only Gideon remained, seated in his chair like a man carved from iron, his gaze fixed on her. At first he offered no words, only silence. But as the days passed, silence gave way to questions. "Why that song tonight?" he asked once, his tone clipped, as though the answer mattered far too much. "It was the one my mother sang when storms rattled the roof," she said, her voice softer than her defiance had ever been. "It made me believe the walls could hold." He looked at her too long, then turned away as though ashamed. "Another night," he asked. "Why do you never tremble?" Rowena laughed bitterly. "Do you think I do not? I tremble every time you look at me, but I will not give you the satisfaction of seeing it." His lips curved faintly. "Foolish courage," he murmured. "That is what will undo you." "Or save me," she countered. And with each exchange, the air between them grew tighter, more dangerous, until her songs became less like offerings and more like confessions whispered into firelight. On the 7th evening, when her song ended, Gideon spoke again, this time not as a duke, but as a man. "You asked me once why I wear cruelty like a crown," he said. His voice was low, strained, as though he regretted the words even as he released them. "I will tell you. Not because you deserve it, but because I am tired of being seen as a monster without reason." Rowena stilled. He rose, pacing to the window where the night pressed black against the glass. His shoulders were taut, his fists clenched. "The court is a pit of wolves. I learned early. Mercy is weakness. Weakness is death. My uncle slit my father's throat for the throne. My mother's kin poisoned her to break our line. And when I inherited, they tried to do the same to me. Smiles at my table, knives beneath them. Do you wonder why I sharpened cruelty into armor?" The revelation struck her like a blow. Not because she pitied him. She would not allow herself that. But because it explained the shadow in his gaze, the silence in his voice when the court praised him too loudly. He turned then, eyes catching the firelight. "If they see hesitation, they will strike. If they think me soft, they will tear me apart. So yes, I am ruthless. Yes, I am feared. It is the only way to survive." Rowena's throat tightened. She saw him differently now, not as a faceless tyrant, but as a man cornered by blood and betrayal, clutching cruelty like a shield. For the first time she understood. She stepped closer, her chains whispering against stone. "And yet," she said softly, "you let me sing." His jaw worked, a storm flickering across his face. "Foolish girl," he whispered. "You should hate me. You should tremble. Instead, you stand there with eyes that dare to see past what I have built." Rowena's voice broke, not with fear, but with confession. "Do you think I am not afraid? I am terrified. Not of chains, not even of you, but of fading into nothing, of being insignificant, a merchant's daughter who will never be remembered once she is gone." Their truths hung between them like fragile glass, one breath from shattering. The next nights blurred. Her songs carried new weight, threaded with secrets neither of them had intended to share. Gideon lingered longer, his silence softer, less guarded. When her voice faltered, his gaze steadied her. When his temper threatened, her words cooled him. And beneath it all, something dangerous bloomed. One evening, as her final note faded, Gideon stepped closer. Too close. She could feel the heat of him, see the scar at his temple she had never noticed before. His voice was low, rough. "Your song is not what haunts me, Rowena. It is the fire in you that refuses to die." Her heart pounded, reckless. "Then, perhaps," she said, breath trembling, "you should stop feeding it." The air cracked like lightning. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Gideon's restraint shattered. He caught her face in his hand and pressed his mouth to hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was fierce, consuming, the clash of fire against iron. She should have pulled away, should have remembered the chains, the bargain, the danger. But she kissed him back, reckless and foolish, pouring every trembling fear and every defiant hope into that single breath. When he tore away, his chest heaved, his hand lingered at her cheek as though he could not bear to let go. "This is madness," he rasped. "I cannot keep you close, and I cannot push you away." Rowena's lips trembled, but she lifted her chin. "Then perhaps we are both already lost." Neither of them saw the movement at the far corner of the corridor. A shadow detached from stone, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of discovery. One of Antony's loyal men had found what he sought, the Duke of Weimar, ensnared by the very woman he had dragged in chains. By morning, whispers would carry further than Rowena's song ever could. Was Rowena foolish to let her heart yield to the man who chained her? Or was it the bravest choice she could have made? The palace had always thrummed with whispers, but now they spread like a sickness. Rowena's name slid across banquet tables, passed between wine-dark lips and jewelled fingers. At first it was only Mockery, the merchant's daughter in chains, the girl who had dared stand against the Duke. But then the whispers sharpened, their edges aimed not at her but at him. The Duke listens to her sing every night. The Duke lingers near his prisoner. The Duke is softening. Weakness. It was the one word Gideon had spent his life erasing, and yet it now clung to him like smoke. Anthony was careful, of course. He never said the words outright, never spoke the rumour too loudly. But his eyes gleamed with satisfaction at every council meeting, as though he had already pried open a crack in Gideon's armour. Others followed, their smiles a fraction too indulgent, their bows a fraction too deep. And in the gardens, the knives turned toward Rowena. She had begged for a moment of air, and Gideon had relented. Guards shadowed her steps as she wandered the moonlit paths, her fingers brushing over rose petals heavy with dew. For a fleeting instant, she felt free, like the girl she had been before the ballroom, before the chains, before the fire in Gideon's eyes had burned its way into her. But then the shadows moved. Rough hands closed over her mouth. Another clamped down on her arm, yanking her into the hedges. The guards shouted, but the attack was swift, brutal. A knife pressed against her throat, its cold kiss biting her skin. "This is your warning," a voice hissed hot against her ear. "Leave him, before you bring his ruin and your death." Her heart thundered, but she forced her body still. Foolish courage had always been her flaw, and now it burned through her fear. She ripped her mouth free long enough to spit. "You fear me? Then you should fear him more." The blow came hard, splitting her lip, and then they were gone, vanished into the night as quickly as they had struck. The guards found her crumpled on the gravel path, blood on her mouth, trembling but unbroken. When Gideon saw her, something inside him snapped. He tore through the council chamber like a storm, his voice thunder rolling against the walls. "Who touched her?" he demanded. "Who dares strike what is mine?" The lords shifted uneasily, eyes darting, but no one spoke. Anthony's lips curved faintly, satisfaction hidden behind the mask of civility. Gideon's rage burned hot, but beneath it coiled something worse, fear. For years he had lived with daggers at his back, but never had they touched something he could not replace. Rowena was no soldier, no rival, no pawn in court politics. She was fragile flesh and reckless fire, and now she bore the proof of how easily she could be broken. That night he summoned her. She stood before him in his chamber, her lip swollen, her cheek bruised. Even battered, she lifted her chin, eyes bright with stubborn flame. "I told you I would not break," she whispered. His hands clenched at his sides. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to let her keep singing, to let her fire warm the cold he had carried too long. But the image of blood on her face haunted him, and the thought of her lying lifeless in the gardens was more than he could endure. "You will leave the palace," he said, voice rough with command. Rowena froze. No. It is not a request, he ground out. You will go to your father. You will not return. Her breath caught. For a moment her pride cracked and her pain showed raw. So this is how you protect me? By casting me aside? By saving your life? His voice broke, harsh and desperate. Do you not understand? They will use you to reach me. They will kill you just to see me falter. I cannot. His words cut off, strangled by what he could not say. Rowena stepped forward, tears trembling in her eyes, though her voice was steady. Then let them come. Let them try. But do not pretend this is for me. You send me away because you are afraid of what I mean to you. Her words pierced deeper than any blade. Gideon turned his face, unable to meet her gaze. Go, he whispered. The guards led her out, her chains gone now, but her heart heavier than ever. That night, Rowena wept alone for the first time since her imprisonment. Not for the bruises, not for the whispers, but for the cruelest cut of all. The man who had claimed her song had cast her away. And Gideon, alone in his chamber, pressed his hand to the place where her lips had once touched his, feeling the hollow where her voice no longer filled the silence. He had built his life on cruelty, but for the first time he felt powerless. The court stirred. Anthony's men moved like shadows through the palace, their whispers sharpening into plans. The Duke is distracted. The girl is gone. Now is the time. But Anthony himself smiled coldly. Not yet, he murmured to his loyalists. She is the key. She will not remain gone for long, and when she returns, we will use her to drag him into the open. The trap was set. The bait was already chosen. And both Rowena and Gideon stood on the edge of despair, unaware that the darkest night had not yet ended. Do you think Gideon was right to send Rowena away for her safety? Or was it the most foolish mistake he could have made? The city walls hummed with unease. Rumours prowled like wolves through taverns and market stalls, of a duke distracted, of enemies sharpening their knives, of a merchant's daughter who had somehow cracked the armour of the most ruthless man in the realm. Rowena heard them too. She had been sent away, dismissed with the cruel command of go. But exile did not silence her. At night, in her father's modest home, she sat by the window and sang, not softly for herself, but boldly, so the neighbours could hear, so the streets might carry her voice further. Her father begged her to stop, fearing the danger. But Rowena only lifted her chin. If I stay silent, they win, she said. My voice is all I have, and if it can reach him, then it will. Her song became more than defiance. It became a call. Children whispered of the girl who sang for courage, merchants lingered outside her window for strength, even weary guards paused to listen when her melody rose against the night. She was no longer just a prisoner in chains, she was a flame refusing to die. And though the palace seemed far, her song reached Gideon all the same. He stood alone in his study, the fire guttering low, silence pressing against him like a vice. He had sent her away to save her. He had believed it the only way. But now, with her absence echoing in every corner of the room, he understood the truth. The cruelty he had once worn as armour had become a cage, and without her voice, the cage was closing. On the wind, faint but clear, he heard it, her song. It threaded across the city like a beacon, fragile yet unyielding, and Gideon's knees nearly buckled beneath the weight of it. He pressed his hand to the window, his heart thundering. Foolish girl, he thought. Brave girl. She had defied him, defied them all, by refusing to be silenced. And in that moment, he knew. He could not let her stand alone. The night they reunited was not in his palace, but on the edge of the city walls, where shadows prowled and enemies lurked. Rowena had come to sing for the gathering crowd, her voice ringing against the stones like a bell. Anthony's spies hovered in the throng, watching, waiting for their chance. Gideon arrived on horseback, his cloak a dark flame in the torchlight. The crowd parted, whispers racing like fire through dry grass. He dismounted with the command of a man who still owned the ground beneath his boots, yet his gaze was fixed only on her. Rowena's voice faltered, her song breaking as her eyes widened. "You!" He stepped forward, the firelight gilding the hard lines of his face. "I was a fool," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "I thought I could protect you by sending you away, but all I did was leave you to fight alone, and I will not live in a world where your voice is silenced." Her heart clenched, her lip trembling with both relief and defiance. "And if they kill me for standing here? If they kill you for standing beside me? Then let them try." His voice was iron, but then he softened, his eyes burning into hers. "With you I see hope. Without you I see nothing at all." The words broke the last of her resistance. Tears shone in her eyes, but she did not bow her head. She stepped into his arms, and when his mouth found hers, it was not the desperate clash of chains and shadows, but the sealing of a vow. The crowd erupted, gasps, whispers, the rustle of fear and awe. Anthony's spies fled, running to carry the news. The Duke had chosen her, had claimed her, not as a pawn but as his equal. When they pulled apart, Gideon's hand lingered against her cheek. "This is our fight now," he murmured. "Not mine, not yours, ours, and together we will end it." Rowena nodded, her voice steady despite the tears. "Then let them come." They stood before the crowd, united, a duke and a merchant's daughter, a man of iron and a woman of fire. Whispers had once sought to break them, but now their bond had become a weapon. The final confrontation loomed, closer than either of them could admit. But for the first time, they did not face it alone. Would you fight for a love that makes you vulnerable, or let it go to stay safe? The night of the feast shimmered with danger. The great hall blazed with chandeliers and silver goblets, yet beneath the splendor lay a tension sharp enough to cut. Nobles gathered in clusters, their whispers coiling like smoke through the air. Servants moved briskly, their eyes downcast, while guards lined the walls with hands on hilts. Gideon stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding, his face carved from stone. Beside him sat Rowena, her gown simple compared to the glittering jewels around her, but her presence drew every gaze. It had been her idea to stand openly at his side. She had argued it was the only way to face the whispers, by stepping into them, not hiding from them. Gideon had resisted, but at last he relented. Now, as he watched her straighten her shoulders against the storm, he felt both pride and fear. Then Anthony rose. "My lords! My ladies!" Anthony's voice rang out, smooth and silken, carrying the false charm of a man who had sharpened it to a weapon. "We gather tonight not merely to share in feast and wine, but to speak truth of what has been festering within our walls. Our Duke, once feared, once respected, has been undone, not by blade, not by battle, but by a woman." Gasps rippled across the hall. All eyes swung to Rowena. Anthony's smile was a dagger. A merchant's daughter, a prisoner, and now, his weakness. "Tell me, my lords, how long before his enemies exploit what we already see? How long before his throne falls because he could not master his own heart?" Murmurs rose, scandalous, hungry. The feast dissolved into a storm of voices. Rowena's chest tightened, but she did not look away. She could feel Gideon stiffen beside her, the fury gathering like thunder in his veins. He moved to stand, but she touched his hand, light, steady. "Let me," she whispered. Before he could stop her, she rose. The hall fell silent. Her lip trembled, but her eyes were steady as she lifted her chin. "You want proof of my worth," she said, her voice carrying to every corner. "Then listen." And she began to sing. It was not a polished court aria. It was not the frivolous melodies nobles favoured for dances. It was the same song she had sung in her cell, the one her mother had taught her in the quiet of their modest home. Her voice wove through the hall like light through stained glass, filling the rafters, spilling over stone and silk alike. It trembled with truth, with defiance, with unyielding fire. Her song was simple, only a few lines. Chains may bind my hands, but not the fire in my soul. Strike me down, and still I rise. Love will make the broken whole. The murmurs died. Heads bowed. Even the cruelest of his rivals stilled as the sound washed over them. By the time the final note faded, silence hung heavy, awed, reverent, unbreakable. Rowena's voice did what no argument, no threat, no blade could have done. It silenced doubt. Anthony's face twisted with fury. He had planned to corner Gideon with whispers, but now the noble's hearts had tilted toward her. Her song had undone him, unmasking his plots. If he let the moment stand, Gideon would rise untouchable, and Anthony's chance to unseat him would be lost forever. "Do not be deceived by pretty tricks," he spat, his voice shrill with desperation. "This is sorcery of the heart, nothing more. She has blinded him, blinded all of you. Will you let a girl's song be the ruin of Weymouth?" Gideon rose then, his chair scraping against the stone floor. His gaze was fire, his voice thunder. "No. You are the ruin, Anthony. You who creep like a rat in shadows, who wield whispers like knives. You call my heart a weakness. You are wrong. It is my strength." The hall trembled with the force of his declaration. Anthony snarled, signalling his men. Swords flashed as loyalists leapt from their seats, blades drawn, ready to strike. Chaos erupted. Screams, clattering steel, overturned goblets. But Gideon was already moving, his own blade unsheathed in a single fluid motion. "Protect her!" he roared, and his guards surged forward. The clash was brutal. Steel rang against steel, torches spilled, flames licking the edges of banners. Gideon fought like a storm-given flesh, every blow precise, every strike fueled by years of fury. Anthony lunged, his own blade desperate and wild. "You cannot save her!" Anthony bellowed. "You cannot save yourself!" Their swords collided, sparks flying. Gideon pressed forward, eyes blazing. "I do not need saving, I have her." With a final, brutal strike, he disarmed Anthony, sending his blade skittering across the floor. Anthony staggered back, gasping, eyes wide with disbelief. "This ends now," Gideon growled. Guards seized Anthony, dragging him down as the hall erupted, not with whispers, but with cheers. The rebellion was crushed, the coup undone. The nobles bowed, not to Anthony's fear, but to Gideon's truth. They had seen strength not in cruelty, but in the fire of a duke who fought beside his people, and in the courage of the woman who sang for them all. Gideon turned, chest heaving, and found Rowena where she stood, her gown spattered with drops of spilled wine, her hands trembling but her chin lifted high. Their eyes met, and the chaos of the hall faded, until there was only her. He crossed the distance between them, and before the eyes of his court, took her hand. "No more hiding," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "No more chains. This woman is not my downfall. She is my salvation, my strength." Then, with the fire of triumph still burning in his veins, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. The hall erupted again, not with scandal this time, but with thunderous applause, with relief, with awe. The Duke of Weimar had not fallen. He had risen, stronger, fiercer, and no longer alone. The seasons turned, carrying the city of Weimar into a gentler rhythm. Winter's bite softened into the tender breath of spring, and the castle that had once felt like a fortress of shadows now breathed with new life. Gardens, once neglected, flourished again under Rowena's care. Music drifted through the halls more often than silence, and where nobles had once bowed in fear, they now bowed with cautious respect, some even with admiration. It had been months since the night of the feast, months since Anthony's failed coup. He languished in a dungeon cell far from the palace, his name reduced to a whisper, a warning of what greed could bring. Gideon had not ruled with cruelty since that night. Instead, He had begun the arduous work of reform. The council of nobles who had once thrived on manipulation found themselves confronted by a duke who demanded honesty. Their schemes faltered in the light of his steady gaze, and the woman who often stood quietly at his side. Rowena was no longer the trembling girl who had once entered the ballroom with fear etched into her bones. The woman who walked the palace corridors now carried her head high, her voice unshaken, her presence steady. Servants smiled when they passed her, guards straightened with pride, and even those who once doubted her whispered, "She is the Duke's strength." The day of their wedding dawned bright, as though the heavens themselves had chosen to bless it. The bells of Weymouth tolled across the city, their joyous notes carrying from the highest towers to the humblest merchant stalls. Streets once lined with suspicion now brimmed with flowers and ribbons, the people celebrating with unrestrained delight. Within the great cathedral, sunlight streamed through stained glass, casting rivers of colour across the aisle where Rowena walked. Her gown was not the gilded finery of noble tradition, but a creation of her own choosing. Soft white silk embroidered with tiny threads of silver, simple yet radiant, reflecting her truth. She moved with quiet grace, each step echoing not of fear, but of destiny fulfilled. Gideon waited at the altar. The cruel Duke, once a man whose presence silenced rooms through dread alone, stood now with something new in his bearing. His black cloak was gone, replaced with garments of deep blue and silver, the colours of his house. His face, usually stern, softened when his gaze fell upon her. For the first time, he looked not like a weapon sharpened by survival, but like a man who had finally allowed himself to hope. When she reached him, he offered his hand. She placed hers within it, steady and sure. The vows they spoke were not the scripted recitations of tradition. Gideon refused to allow the priest to dictate his words, and Rowena had insisted on the same. Their vows were their own, forged from trials, from nights of fear and days of defiance. "I once thought cruelty was my shield," Gideon said, his voice carrying through the cathedral, low but powerful. "That if I was ruthless, no blade could reach me, no whisper could undo me. But then you defied me, and you showed me I was wrong. Cruelty was never strength, it was a cage. You freed me from it, Rowena, and I swear before all here and all beyond that I will never return to it. You are not my weakness. You are my heart, my strength, my truth." Rowena's eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice did not waver. "I came here trembling once, a girl who thought she had no place among nobility. You mocked me, you tested me, you tried to cast me aside. But Gideon, I saw what no one else dared see. The man beneath the mask. You feared love would make you weak, but love has made you more than you ever were. Today I vow to walk beside you not as your prisoner, but as your partner. Not as the trembling girl, but as the woman who will never stop singing for you." The silence that followed was thick with awe. Then the priest spoke the final blessing, and when Gideon bent to kiss her, it was not with the hunger of a duke claiming possession, but with the tenderness of a man surrendering wholly to love. The city erupted into celebration. Trumpets blared, children danced in the streets, merchants poured wine freely, and nobles who once whispered now toasted. Within the palace, the great hall glittered with light, the feast stretching long into the night. But it was not the opulence that marked the occasion. It was the joy. Servants laughed as freely as nobles, guards clinked goblets with merchants, and songs filled the air. Gideon and Rowena did not linger long in the hall. When the moment allowed, they slipped away to the palace gardens, where lanterns glowed softly among blossoming roses. There, beneath the starlit sky, Gideon drew her into his arms. "You tamed me," he said quietly, his lips brushing her hair. Rowena smiled against his chest. "No, you were never meant to be tamed, only to be seen." He held her tighter, the words sinking into his soul. For so long, he had been a man feared for his cruelty. Now standing with her, he was something else, something greater. In the months that followed, their marriage became legend. Gideon ruled not with iron cruelty, but with the steadiness of a man unafraid to show his heart. Nobles still tested him, but found themselves confounded, because behind every decree, behind every decision, stood Rowena's quiet strength. She sang still, her voice drifting through the palace, and her song became the anthem of a new era in Weimar. Together, they reformed the court. Corruption was rooted out, alliances reforged, and peace settled like morning light across the land. Gideon was still formidable, still strong, but now his strength was no longer built on fear. It was built on love. And Rowena, once a trembling merchant's daughter, now stood as Duchess of Weimar. No longer a prisoner, no longer an outsider, she was his partner, his equal, his legend. The people whispered not of the cruel duke, but of the love story that had changed him. They whispered of the girl who had defied chains, who had stood tall in the face of scorn, who had turned cruelty into compassion. They whispered of Rowena, the woman who had tamed the cruel duke's heart. As they walked together on the palace balcony one evening, looking out over the city lights, Rowena leaned against him. "Do you think they will ever forget who you were?" she asked softly. Gideon kissed her temple. "Perhaps not, but let them remember. Let them see that even the cruelest heart can change." She smiled, her hand finding his. "Then let us give them more to remember. Not your cruelty, but our love." And with the stars above and the city below, they stood together, no longer burdened by chains, but embraced by hope. Do you believe love can truly change even the cruelest heart?